Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. It's almost impossible to overstate the importance the original 1933 King Kong has had on the monster movie genre and on the history of cinema overall. For nearly a century, Kong has always just been there, as a character, as a concept, as a metaphor, inspiring filmmakers and special effects artists for generations. Yet, due to its longevity and legacy, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that there was a time before Kong, and that there were individuals who brought the character and the film surrounding him into existence. People like producer-directors Merian C. and Ernest B. Schoedsack, writers Edgar Wallace, James Creelman, and Ruth Rose, special effects wizards Willis O'Brien and Marcel Delgado, composer Max Steiner, and sound effects pioneer Murray Spivack. The alchemy of the entire production team coalesced into a masterpiece of action, adventure, drama, and romance that broke box office records during the height of the Great Depression and grossed even higher returns during its re-releases in 1938 and 1952, including its own sequel, Son of Kong, which amazingly premiered in December of 1933, a mere 9 months later. King Kong has inspired remakes, spin-offs, rip-offs, and the entire giant monster movie subgenre. The entire world knows the name of Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. The immortal ape is our subject tonight, and I'm thrilled to be discussing this incredibly epic film with another incredibly epic panel of guests. So I'm going to bring everybody in, and let's say hi to Doug Long.
Hello.
Michael Weber. Bobby Zier.
Hi.
And Stan Hyde. And we're going to be talking about King Kong and Son of Kong, both from 1933, both celebrating their 90th anniversary. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming in. This is truly one of my favorite movies. It's just a great time, and I've kind of immersed myself in Kong over this past week in preparation for this episode. And it's kind of remarkable when you think about the fact that there was a time before Kong, but then Kong's legacy just, on cinema overall, just so incredible. Max Steiner's score, things like that. I'd love to just kind of go around. Stan, if you don't mind kicking us off, where did you encounter King Kong for the first time?
I encountered Kong for the first time in the pages of Famous Monsters of Filmland, as I encountered so many things. And I was watching TV one night, and there was a this would be probably back in the late 60s, and there was this sudden image of this hairy back pushing on doors, trying to get through to Anne, and it was like, oh my God, that's King Kong. And so I dutifully, stayed up to watch it. Argued with my parents a bit to let me stay up a little late to see the movie, but it was television the first time. We actually had a weird thing in Canada too. There was a guy who would talk about films, and they would be shown in 4 parts, and there would be discussion that would, kick off the show. So I also remember seeing that really early on too, at my grandmother's house after school. Trying to remember the guy's name now, but it was basically sort of film class analysis on the CBC, and they would show part of the film and then talk about it.
That's great. Yeah, well, and Stan, I know you from G-Fest, so I know you're a giant monster lover. So I'm really glad to have it on the show. Bobby, what about you?
The first time I ever heard of King Kong was actually in the documentary Monster Mania, and they showed like the quick clip of the train sequence, and he explains it's like a 50-foot gorilla. And then my next exposure was actually the ride, Confrontation in the Universal Studios in Florida. And it was like the train sequence was the ride. Like it would grab you, and like it had the giant King Kong head. You took a picture at the end, and in the gift shop they actually had the videotape for the original, and I bought that as one of my souvenirs. And it was like the first thing I watched when I got home.
Had you not seen it before?
No, I had never seen it before.
Oh, wow,
I only
that's
seen that
fantastic.
little bit in Monster Mania.
Michael, what about you?
Yeah, I took a strange route to the actual 33 movie because my first introduction was a vinyl record that was a recording of a radio version of King Kong that was done. And the record must have been released like in the 60s or the 70s when they weren't being very specific about what was the origin of this radio adaptation, meaning like, was it Lux Radio Theater or something like that? But it's a very interesting story to listen to because it's so fantastic. Your imagination can make it be, of course, as wild and as crazy as you would want it to be. And then I think the first film adaptation of it I saw was the Dino De Laurentiis version before seeing the 33. So it was a strange journey to get to it, and yet that little model still broke my heart in a way that I was not expecting. I was not expecting the kind of emotion I had at the end. And that's obviously what we're going to talk about today. But yeah, it still got me. It's still got
awesome. Me. And Doug, I know you've taught this film in your classes. I'm curious to hear how you kind of came to Kong for the first time.
Well, it would have been TV for me too. In the early 70s is when I was really getting into film history as a kid. And so I'm sure I saw it on TV. I don't know. We had in Central Indiana, a horror movie host named Sammy Terry, and we kids loved him. So it could have been there. I don't remember, but he was really pop culture back then. Bad Leroy Brown. There's Badder Than Old King Kong, Meaner Than a Junkyard Dog. I had a model that I made of King Kong, like instead of model cars or airplanes, anything boring like that, they had monsters.
I kind of came to Kong through Godzilla, actually, because they used to have the Crestwood. They were orange binding on these monster books. And I, of course, I saw Godzilla for the first time, and I went to the library and they had other monsters. And that was kind of like, oh, wait, it's not just Godzilla. And they had one on King Kong. And so I learned about Kong and Son of Kong and King Kong escapes and King Kong versus Godzilla. And I was like, oh, this is wonderful. But like you, Michael, I don't think I saw the original 33 until after I'd seen the Dino De Laurentiis, and maybe even after I'd seen King Kong versus Godzilla. I don't think it played on syndication with the same frequency that those did. My most treasured memory is seeing it on the big screen. They played it on the campus of the University of Colorado one year, and seeing that on the big screen, you kind of got an idea of like what this must have been like for an audience in 1933, like when cinema and sound is still very young. And I just remember just being blown away, and I had just completely new respect being able to see it on that scale. So let's start off, because I think, as you kind of alluded, Michael, like the star of the film is Kong, but Kong is a visual effect. Kong is a puppet that is animated through stop motion. Doug, if I can bounce down to you really quick, like what do you kind of like talk to your classes about when you're introducing the idea of like what Willis O'Brien and Marcel Delgado did for this film?
I think what I think is interesting, one of the things I think is interesting about the film are the technical things, but also, as you were saying, where it comes in film history. Their work would have just been unprecedented. Willis O'Brien had done The Lost World in the silent era. So we did see some dinosaurs before that. But as you say, with the sound and all that, and on a large screen, it would have been overwhelming. Really the way Jurassic Park was for the people in the 90s.
The idea of like this model emoting, like you're getting, it's a genuine character. Yeah. Like we are absolutely invested in the emotional arc of Kong, and that's kind of remarkable. I
think one of the most moving scenes in 1930s cinema is Kong's death on the Empire State Building, because it's almost balletic, the moves he does right at the end. And Max Steiner's music, which in some movies can be overpowering, but its overpowering nature is totally appropriate in King Kong, goes right along with that. And you're right, our sympathies are certainly with King Kong, not any of the people.
Yeah, it's amazing to think when you're thinking of 1933, like what's going on special effect wise with, I mean, with the Invisible Man and Jekyll and Hyde the year before, just a couple of years before. I mean, it's really like they're just stretching their muscles in terms of what they can do. I mean, it truly, like to your point, Aaron, it must have been just people must have been amazed sitting in a theater and watching what they were being asked to accept as real, you know.
As a lot of you guys know, 1931 Dracula is my favorite movie, and this seems like light years ahead of that. It's incredible. Like you wouldn't think it was just 2 years. So it's honestly like mind blowing to think like what this was like when it first came out. As I was just like watching it, like all the different special effects they do, all the different like the emotion of King Kong, because this is even before Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So even like animation normal animation hadn't met that stride yet. So yeah, it's mind blowing what this would have been like.
I think of Kong as sort of the grandfather of special effects movies, and he was the perfect grandfather. I mean, he's one of the first synthetic characters who's being made from a puppet. I mean, you know, later on there'd be CGI, later on there might be motion capture, there'd be other forms of doing it, but he's truly emotional. You truly care about it. And the world that's created, you know, in terms of with the glass mats and the projections and everything, it's this amazing world, and it's sort of the archetype, like you can do this. Movies can show you anything. Even back in 1933, it's a big investment, and not everybody's going to be able to afford to do it.
Well, and our producers and directors, Merian C. Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack, on the DVD that came out around 2005, it was when Peter Jackson's King Kong was coming out, and there's a really terrific like 2.5 hour documentary about the making of the film, but also about Cooper himself. And he just kind of like, I always think of Cooper as kind of the King Kong guy, but he was so much more than that. You know, he was kind of a groundbreaking filmmaker in terms of, you know, going to exotic places and capturing. I mean, he's very much the template for the character of Carl Denham in the film.
And pushing things like color and cinerama and stuff like that too, as well as being an aviator. Like he's kind of a Renaissance man.
And also somebody at RKO who touches this film in like a really important way, you know, is David O. Selznick,
sure,
who is part of the process and says, oh, you know what, call it King Kong. And then he leaves and goes and starts his own studio, you know.
On the videotape of King Kong that I had before the movie, they actually had like a 20-minute documentary about King Kong. And I was just in the 3rd grade, but when they were explaining about Merian C. Cooper, I remember I got confused and thought that actually like that it wasn't an actor like playing him, that it was actually Merian C. Cooper in the movie.
So as Carl Denham?
Yeah, as Carl Denham. Yeah. So like, like even like in my first like time watching it, like the two like the real person and the fictional character like combined into one.
You know, I mean, there's something you mentioned, Aaron, too, that can't be neglected in terms of this high sense of emotion that goes along with this film, and that's Max Steiner.
Mm-hmm.
Especially just at a time when, you know, complete musical scores were not the norm. And the other one I immediately think of at this time is Bride of Frankenstein, just a couple of years later, which is so impactful when you compare it to Frankenstein or Dracula that had no musical score except for opening credits. And I think it has everything to do with why this film is so surprisingly emotional for so many people. It's just powerful.
I mean, I think one thing that Max Steiner does really well is that, I mean, we get music in the opening titles, but then nothing until they start on the ride out to Skull Island. And it's very gentle until things start to happen. And then it goes wild, of course.
And I love how they do that, because it really, something I'm so impressed with it. Like in the beginning of King Kong, it feels like almost like a Great Depression documentary. Like it feels very like real world. And then you don't hear the music, and you hear Denham says, "Scream, man, scream for your life!" Ah! And then you transition to the boat is surrounded by fog, and that's when the music comes in. Yeah. It just takes you from the reality into the fantasy world so subtly and so delicately. It's incredible.
That's such a good point, Bobby. I never really thought of that. That this film, it almost feels like a Warner Brothers gangster movie or 42nd Street or something like that, with the whole, we're going to go to Broadway and the whole thing. It's whereas we think of like so many of these fantasy films of the near time to this as being so steeped in German, right, sort of fantasy and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And this is such an American film. It's about Broadway and New York and elevated trains and snappy people who talk in a funny way, and yet it's so real. I think they really wanted to set it up to go, oh no, this is our world.
Robert Armstrong as Carl Denham is such a totally great American character, and the music, the way it does, leitmotif or leitmotif? How am I supposed to say that? I always say leitmotif. I'm not sure if it's right, but the way there are parallel structures, like when the native chief steps down, and then later on the music of Kong stepping down. I know even as a young person, I was really aware of the music and how those themes kept coming in and how they emphasize stuff. I almost wonder if they were worried that the animation might pull it off. And that's one of the reasons they went with such an elaborate score, because they were trying to support it. Not that it needs that much support, but it's an amazing score.
Well, and something you just said, Michael, I hadn't even considered, but yeah, you're right. Like Dracula and Frankenstein, they feel like they're kind of far off places. They're not like urban. I mean, even though we'd had films like Mystery of the Wax Museum and, that Dr. X, we're in an urban environment. I feel like this, this just kind of like feels very here and now, kind of like we just said, Bobby, like the idea of like these are characters that you recognize. If you're in the Depression era, you recognize these people on the screen, and you recognize, like there is that temptation for Anne to steal an apple because like she hasn't eaten in how many ever days,
But Dr. X, you've still got a film that has Ted Healy from the Three Stooges with Lionel Atwill, with his sort of urbane and Britishness and everything. It's still it's like Universal, where you're going, what country are we in? They have, right. Some people are driving cars. Some people are in horse carriages. What era is this? This is absolutely New York in the 30s. It's totally contemporary within its time, without an error, except for Skull Island, which is timeless, and has dinosaurs. I mean, it's great.
When we talk about Skull Island, like some of those sequences are just like having them broken down in those documentaries and things like that, where they talk about what the layering of all the different special effects. Like there's that one sequence where he's fighting the plesiosaur, where you've got actual water in the foreground. You've got a projected image of Bruce Cabot over here and Fay Wray over here. You've got the matte paintings in the back. You've got Kong doing the animated figure of Kong. And it's just like, it's just like you said, Doug, like it's just like incredible the amount of, and it's groundbreaking. It's things that you don't know if they're going to work. And it's not like you can go back and check the monitor like we can today, like it's one of those things where it's like, well, I hope we got it. And then you check the rushes. And if you didn't get it, you got to go back and do it the next day.
And some of those matte paintings are grand, like the cliff where the pterodactyl comes in, just beautiful art.
Well, and they also mentioned like the Willis O'Brien, like the little animated birds that just float in the foreground. Yeah. And they again, they don't do anything in terms of affecting the action, but they create so much atmosphere. They lend such a quality of place and reality.
And it's so ironic because those birds were later used in Citizen Kane.
Really?
And it's so interesting how Citizen Kane is given so much credit for being so revolutionary in its filmmaking, and you can go, come on, look at this.
Yeah.
This was, and so many years earlier,
Right.
all the techniques that were going on. And like you're saying, they had no idea on how to, did it work or didn't it? I don't know.
Right.
What imaginations.
It's not like the animation in 1925 in The Lost World isn't amazing, but there's no character who's sort of a character that you can, they're all dinosaurs. So they're a little cold, but Kong is more than that. He's an artificial character who's also emotionally appealing, scary too, and emotional.
Well, and so much of that credit though is neglected to be given to Fay Wray on the way she looked at him, on the way on what she projected in terms of her journey and imbuing this nothing. I mean, what was she given? A spot on the wall to look at and act?
No, that's right. That's right. And you think about like there's that giant hand that she's sitting in, but other than that, she's just acting out into space, and it must have been remarkable for her to watch the finished film and be like, oh, that's my co-star. I remember they lured her into it saying, Miriam Cooper saying, I'm going to get you the tallest, darkest leading man in Hollywood. And she thought it was Cary Grant, but turned out to be somebody much, much bigger and more enduring for that matter.
Well, and the thing there, when you think about the way direction was given in silent films, where the director was able to talk to the actor through a journey of emotion, and she didn't get that because she was emoting and speaking and screaming, of course, that Fay Wray scream. I mean, for long takes at a time.
But it's kind of fun to watch that scene on the boat where Carl Denham essentially does that, directs her, look up more.
And it's so like her scream, even in that, it's like so foreshadowing of what she's gonna see.
Well, I think the movie is innovative structurally too, and I think it is at 45 minutes or something before we see Kong. Just so much anticipation leading up to it.
Yeah, like the scream, like the music when you get to the island, all the fog. I was so impressed by how well they think it through, like the emotions of sad and like how he's like attracted to her, like all like the little details that go into it. It's incredible, like how that they were able to, like what an innovation that was.
Well, and I heard that like Willis O'Brien would he would look in the mirror and make faces. And they'd be like, okay, well, that conveys this emotion. So I need to raise his brow a little bit, or I need to, peel his lips back a little bit to convey what, it's like, and you imagine what that must be like to act at, one frame at a time, and how that incremental emotion.
In an interview, he said that you really had to be isolated doing the work, because if somebody stopped and talked to you, you would forget what just the second before you were thinking with Kong or whoever.
It's never underplayed. It's never overplayed. It's always so natural.
Well, that's the fun thing about Kong. And I think that's kind of the overall quality of the film, is that everything is heightened. Yeah. And so we buy it. Everything is at the same, it's pitched at that same, high drama, melodrama level, but it never feels fake. It feels grounded even in its fantasy. And I love, and I think that's, that's why Steiner's score can soar as loud as it does. And that's why, Robert Armstrong doesn't feel like weird, fakey,
my biggest problem with the Peter Jackson one is Jack Black, the Carl Denham character, just totally unappealing, whereas Robert Armstrong is great throughout, and in Son of Kong.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going back to what we just said about Merian Cooper, is that, you get the sense that he is that robust character, but he's not like pulling some like shady business deal. He's just got more enthusiasm than the rest of the world put together.
Well, he's a P.T. Barnum, which is such an American icon. If you can sell it and convince us, you win.
And Robert Armstrong, like he feels so real as Carl Denham. Like you can honestly tell that the inspiration is on the other side of the camera. he feels really grounded in reality.
That's true.
Whereas Peter Jackson, he feels more exaggerated.
We'll talk about some of the other iterations of Kong, toward the end, just to kind of get a reflection as to the evolution of this character. One other element is the innovation of sound effects for this film.
Right.
They were literally, because The Lost World, as you mentioned, it was a silent film, so we didn't need to hear the sounds of dinosaurs. But here we had this fantastical, giant ape, and he had to fight all of these different creatures, and they all had to make sounds. And Murray Spivack is back there just kind of like going, what does this sound like to me? And, like, I think Kong's roar is like a lion and a tiger roar, like played backwards and forwards.
In a televised interview with him, Murray Spivack, and for Kong's grunts and all that, he just did it himself in a megaphone.
The one that always got my students when I did the filming classes was Kong breaking the T-Rex's jaw. That
Gross.
which I think is celery being broken close to a microphone, as I recall. But everybody just wins, and even this is very modern students going, ugh,
Radio was certainly a thing, so like Foley work was not unheard of, but what Spivack is doing, like with changing the speed on recordings, like taking things and running them backwards, just finding sounds that feel unworldly, that feel like they could only have come from Skull Island. And kind of what we were talking about with Steiner, like the specificity for each moment, and heightening it and elevating it, just the way the rest of the film does.
One of my favorite Steiner moments is when Anne and Jack they've jumped off the cliff into the water, and the music is all excited. Then we go back to the boat, and it's very gentle, and people are sleeping. And then we're back to the jungle, and the two of them are running toward the camera, which is backing up, and the music is excited again.
The music is like perfect for like every spot, like just like the emotion of it. I especially love the music when King Kong first appears. Like how big, like what an epic introduction it feels like.
We were looking at that last night because Anne is tied up to the altar. My wife was like, wait, how do her arms not get like ripped off, like when he grabbed? And I went, you know what, I don't remember. But then you see Kong like do a little thing with his finger, and he unwinds the one arm, and then she loosens herself on the other side. I was like, see, they thought it through.
Yeah.
I continue. It's just amazing how everything kind of comes together in that one film. It's sound effects, music, special effects. It's like so much the pattern for so much of what we do today, or filmmakers do today.
The fact that it broke records, during the Great Depression, it was the great escape for people. Like, it was an event that reminded you of, magic in the world. And then it made even more money on re-releases. And it was in large ways responsible for kind of the monster boom of the 50s. When it came out in 1952, like suddenly, we see them, and we see Godzilla,
Tarantula, all of those.
Yeah.
And yet a degradation. When you think about those films, very few of them, with the exception maybe of Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is why it had a special affection for people, was that it didn't have emotion. You didn't have a scene in Tarantula or in Them like you had in Creature with him swimming underneath her, or those types of things which humanize the character, which had been lost with the mid-30s Universal films. It's why it's the one character that they kind of still put with
as a classic Universal classic.
The Wolfman. Yeah.
Well, I think that's also part of why it's so scary, because we already know Anne by the time she's stuck up there on the podium. In Cicely Tyson's memoir, she was a little girl when this came out, and she said she was so scared she never saw another movie at a theater until her own film Sounder opened in 1972.
So Psycho scared people out of the shower, but that one scared her out of the theater.
Right.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, your point about Creature from the Black Lagoon, I mean, it is basically Kong. Like it is that template, you know, it's like it introduces, you know, we've heard about this exotic thing. We're going to go find it, you know, and it's going to have a relationship with our female lead. I mean, it is very much the King Kong beats. And it works. It works so well.
In the sequels to that film, unlike the sequel to this film, it degenerated. You know, they didn't build on it, which I think is the shock to anybody who enjoys King Kong, that you go, oh, Son of Kong is naturally going to be a degradation down. And in fact, it isn't. It's a big surprise as to what the pleasures are that are waiting for you in Son of Kong.
Well, let's actually shift to Son of Kong, because what you just said, Michael, like I had seen Son of Kong maybe once before, but I think I believed all the propaganda that I read in the reference books, where they're kind of like, yeah, you know, it's a quickie sequel, quickly thrown together, doesn't have the same blah, 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 blah. And yes, that's true, but it's not nearly the step down. I mean, you know, you think about how monumental Kong is. So for anything to kind of reach that same height is ridiculous. But it really does kind of follow in the same heart and spirit, and you stay connected to the character of Carl Denham, and I love the fact that it starts off with him, you know, being responsible for everything that happened in Kong, which feels absolutely right. You know, it's like there's actually some fallout from what went before, which you rarely see in a sequel.
And I think the most effective thing that happened is they were smart to build on what you knew, which was the character of Denham. It's such a richer character in that. And then, of course, you know, he's the love interest as opposed to being the mastermind, which I don't think you see coming in a way.
Yeah.
And further, they give him Helen Mack, who you go, oh, she's going to be just so, and she's not. She's really a terrific next person after Fay Wray. Like really builds on, you go, yeah, I want to see the two of them together. It's so surprising.
I had to grow up to appreciate Son of Kong, because as a monster kid, I it's like it takes so long to get back to Skull Island. As an adult, Helen Mack and Robert Armstrong, they're awesome. It's an awesome movie because of the human characters, but it was one of those things where it's like I had to make that journey to, I'm really paying attention to something more than just the action in the movie. Because it's terrific. It's a movie that definitely I reassessed once I got a little older.
Yeah, I think the same. You know, like again, watching it this past week, I was like, wow, like this has so much more going for it than I remembered. And even though, yes, it does take a while for us to get back to Skull Island, like that journey is so weird that I'm engaged as an adult. I think I'm more engaged than I would have been as a kid. I think like you, Stan, I would have been like, come on, where's the monsters? But like just the weirdness of like them going to Kang for, you know, as Denham and Engelhorn are trying to escape, you know, the solicitors, but they end up there and they meet Helen Mack and her father, who's played by Clarence Wilson, who was in Son of Frankenstein. He's the doctor. Okay, the little cabaret that her father is leading, like that whole monkey act, I was like, you know, if you could get a set of monkeys that would actually play recognizable music, I mean, that's impressive.
It's a great choice for Son of Kong too. Have monkeys.
It really is. It's such a like fun sequel. You know, it's like, because I mean, first of all, it'd be such a shame if like the first movie was all we had is Robert Armstrong as Carl Denham. Like it's so great to have a new Carl Denham adventure where you spend more time with him. But like the special effects are great once again. Like it has like the plot. It's like fun. Like the monkey act is cool. Like it's just like it's like a great fun like Skull Island adventure.
And I mean, once we do get introduced to Son of Kong, I mean, it's done in a very cute way. And I think that kind of, it sets the tone for what this movie is going to be. It's not going to be epic and awesome in that it awe-inspiring. It's going to be something that is a little more juvenile, but in the right way.
Lighthearted.
Yeah, it's lighter-hearted. Exactly.
Well, it's interesting that they decided to go with this younger version of, they didn't try to go for the same things that they went for in the first film. And yet I thought a lot of the action sequences I thought were decidedly more violent, more graphic, shockingly so. I thought, and yet at the same time, they didn't go, well, everybody wants that, extremely, beastly monster, and let's make it even more monstrous. It's like they didn't. They went in the opposite direction and kind of made him cute because it was a youngster,
Well, that's what it reminded me of, Michael, is it was like, young pups or cubs wrestling. So it is more intense and more violent in that regard. It doesn't feel like they're playing for keeps in the same way that Kong is like looking to just end this fight as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Whereas like when young Kong is fighting the bear, like that battle goes on for days. And I was like, wow, he's still fighting that bear, and that bear has not given up yet.
Yeah. And the ending of it, it's so interesting how they thought and kind of hearkened to the other ending with him having a last moment of letting Anne go to, in this sense, saving him. And I hadn't seen it in so long. And sense as the island is starting to sink into the sea, they give you a lot of time to contemplate, wait a minute, where this is going. That they're going to drown. And that there's only one way, is he going to do it? Is he going to save, or at least try to save Denham? And then he does it, and it's so heartbreaking all over again. And you go, oh.
The Kong family sort of ultimately forgives Denham. He gets saved.
Well, and he's explicit about apologizing. He's like, I'm really sorry. I kind of did your old man in there, and I apologize for that.
Almost the opposite effect of Jaws, where it's like the monster remembers you and it's going to come and kill you. In this one, the monster and its family remembers you, and it has some strange affection for you.
And I really like that with his character, because he he was what he did in the first movie was like a mistake, but he had the best of intentions, he never meant to cause that harm. So I feel like it was a very natural progression of his character to want to make amends.
Well, and I think it's funny you say that, Bobby, because I mean, as you look at it through 21st century eyes, you're like, this is an exploitation, he's looking to capture this wild animal and display it, and it feels very commercial and kind of cold-hearted. And for him to have had that revelation on his own, and for the filmmakers to have allowed that to happen. I love the fact that that's where the narrative goes, is that we get to see Carl Denham have a change of heart, that he doesn't just go off and try and find another great big animal that he can exploit and make his money back. He has a completely different relationship to Kong this time around.
And that's kind of a trend thing for film history later on. There's a lot of giant monsters who end up working in entertainment, Gorgo and Kappa, and all these other monsters, Mighty Joe Young, that are brought back as sideshow attractions.
I do have to say, I'd completely forgotten that Skull Island sinks. I was like, what the hell? The whole island's going
forgot that until I rewatched.
That storm comes out of nowhere. It's wait, and now there's earthquakes and there's a hurricane and the island's sinking. I'm like, oh, this is some serious Deus Ex Machina stuff going on.
And it's great because it gives it it goes out with a bang. That's how a King Kong movie should go out, with an epic thing.
Where it's Carl Denham directed it.
Yeah.
What'd be a good ending is everything goes to shit.
Well, maybe they were trying to avoid a part 3, so they're getting rid of just everything involved. One thing, even with that, going, we've got to end really big. One thing that always jumped out at me with that film, and maybe it's because it was made, like you're saying, Aaron, was made such a short time after, is just that little plot point of who the skipper was from the
Mm.
first film, who gave him the map. And it's just a throwaway line, but it's like they went back through and
Right.
really like re-examined and then developed that character that was just sort of a, oh, I got it from this guy. And then they, you know, make it a person as opposed to just completely inventing a new person, you know.
I love the fact that he is just such a slimy guy, and like
Oh, right.
I love the whole mutiny
Mhm.
sequence.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. They put him back on the boat with Denham. And
It's a neat little group then too, because then it has like it has like some conflict into it.
Now-
And Charlie gets a little bit more role too. Granted, it's still certainly an Asian stereotype, but to see it for an Asian actor to get a larger role in a 1933 film is something.
Yeah, he's definitely part of the gang. He's like he's an official, like part of the quartet that's going around now and established as an ally of all of
Right.
that.
It is kind of a standard Lost World trope that everything gets destroyed in the final reel. I mean, that's basically what happens, you know, in the Lost World and a lot of things. It bugs me a little bit. I always kind of go, oh, I want that Lost World to be there. You know, I don't want it destroyed. You know, and I think sometimes it's done for sort of verisimilitude. Well, you've never heard of this because it sank under the ocean afterwards, and so, you know, and
Right.
it's like, no, don't do that. Stick around for another movie.
let us talk really quickly about the other iterations of Kong, because we had King Kong versus Godzilla in '62.
Technically, that's my first King Kong movie, actually, because I saw that in a theater about '63. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, you get to see that in the theater.
I was in Winnipeg. The only time I after the double bill, the other movie was Come Fly With Me, and I went up to the guy running the theater and said, "Can I use the phone?" And I went inside and I phoned my mom. I said, "I'm staying through 2 features to see, you know, Godzilla versus King Kong versus Godzilla again." And the guy who ran the theater, these were different days, just said, "Yeah, that's fine, kid. Just buy some candy."
But and then there was King Kong Escapes, also from Toho, where Kong encounters a mechanical version of himself. And then we had in '76, we had the big remake from Dino De Laurentiis, starring Jessica Lange, Charles Grodin, and Jeff Bridges, and Rick Baker in, you know, a pretty impressive suit, even though I know it's not the suit that Rick Baker wanted it to be. I think it's kind of wonderful that like the 3 main iterations, you got the original one with the stop motion, then you have, you know, Rick Baker basically in a monkey suit and doing a little bit of the giant robot that didn't really work, but you have that giant robot hand. And then you flash forward to Peter Jackson's 2005, where everything's CGI motion capture. And it's really kind of cool to have these 3 different versions of bringing Kong to life, all of which, say what you will about the movies themselves, but I think those 3, like Kong himself in all 3 of those movies, is really impressive.
It's like a great capstone of like the special effects at their height of the era.
I mean, because King Kong in '76 is predating Star Wars, but that the King Kong '76 is just remarkable. And it's another one where I look at it and I go, the fact that they're matting in a giant face, they're matting in Jessica Lange in a hand, they're matting in all, you know, putting all this stuff together, all the different layers, and it plays so well. And Rick Baker's performance is extraordinary.
And I think that especially the first 2 films bear this relationship of a filmmaker obsessed with telling this story, that the producer in some way is really the star of the film. Somebody against everybody going, what a dumb idea, that'll never go anywhere, and stuck to their guns. And I mean, you know, the Jackson one, it was almost sort of like we wanted that version because we knew what he could do and we knew what CGI could do. And I think, you know, a lot of the things that don't work in that movie for me are not the same things that are, you know, that what these 2 films are about. You're watching 2 guys go for broke and, you know, really kind of became the defining films of their careers almost. And films that almost destroyed their careers because of how much was at risk. and one of them succeeding wildly and one of them kind of becoming a joke.
Yeah, I saw that as a kid, and I have never lost my affection for the 76 version. I still love to pop that one in, and I love that whole movie.
Yeah, I saw that one at the theater. One interesting parallel, I think, between the 33 and 76, of course, is at the end of 33, of all things, he climbs the Empire State Building, and it was 2 years old at the time, tallest building in the world, a symbol of American exceptionalism. And then I had not seen hadn't watched the 76 one since 9/11, and watching all those shots of the World Trade Center is so unnerving at this point. But at that point, it also was, 5 years old.
Well, and that both of them set their films in a modern era and try to say, hey, what if this really happened? What havoc would be, would happen in New York if this was in our modern era.
I remain sad that Universal and Jim Danforth didn't do their period remake at the time, though. I would have loved to have seen that movie made too.
When was that slated for, Stan?
Well, it was a competing project with De Laurentiis. Eventually Universal, and it has to do with the rights again. Universal went with, well, you pay us some money and we'll just drop our project and we'll get paid by you guys. So because apparently Danforth was called in by De Laurentiis. We've got one stop motion sequence with the snake. Do you want to do it?
Well, okay. I mean, especially if you're saying it's going to be a period film, assuming they're going to try to set it in the 30s, that the comparison would be so unfair. I mean, by 76, I mean, even looking at Clash of the Titans in 1980, we're still kind of going, okay, this doesn't, it is what it is. It worked in that film, but like to just do
we're talking 76. I mean, we're still getting Sinbad movies by Harry Hoskins. And I think Danforth's a better animator, but and he's a great matte painter. But so I regret not being able to see it. But I regret lots of this, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I would have rather seen Jackson's first script for Kong, if anybody's ever read that, rather than the one they did, where Jack Driscoll is fighting World War I, and it's in a biplane, tossing baseballs and hammering them at German, airplanes. It's a lot more like Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a scene where Anne's father, the archaeologist in that movie, and they're looking at a Buddha, and there's an earthquake or something, and the Buddha's face falls away, and underneath is the face of Kong. There's some great stuff in that script, which I kind of would rather have seen.
So, Bobby, when did you see the Peter Jackson one for the first time?
I saw it actually when it first came out in the theater. I really enjoyed it. Like I liked how it was like very homage to the original. So it felt like close to, like, it had like a lot of things I loved about it. Like I liked how they had the reference to Fay Wray. I liked how they included the choreography of the original film in like the Carl Denham show. Like the original was my favorite, but like I enjoyed it a lot.
It's one of those, because it was such an influential film for Peter Jackson, that I feel like, like he just wanted to get every little bit into it. And I feel like there's times where the excess, that's one thing I can say about the 33, is it never feels excessive, ever. Like it feels like it reaches the peaks and then drops away, and reaches the peaks and drops away, and never feels like it's outstaying just for the sake of spectacle. And there are times where the Jackson one feels a bit like that, where it's just going to hang out just long enough so that you get to see every little thing. And I'm like, at some point, we also have to talk about it, just the narrative and the pace and things like that.
My wife used to say it's the best Kong movie ever made by a 12-year-old boy. Kong's sort of like Grandpa. He's not sort of young Kong who's a little threatening to women as well as being their protector, He's much more a lonely old man who's looking after a child. And it sort of makes it weird, or maybe not weird, but it's sort of, the threat's not there in the same way.
That's actually something that a really great point of it being like kind of like overdone, because one of the things I really liked about the original King Kong was how the sympathetic element in those like deeper elements of his character, they weren't overdone. He was a frightening monster a lot of the time, but you saw those moments of like love and tenderness. So like you knew that they were there, but it never like they never like lingered on it like overly until like the big moments like at the end. And like the other ones, the 76 one and the Peter Jackson one, I felt sometimes they would like overplayed it a little bit. What do you guys think?
Just like some of the melodrama quality.
Yeah.
They were going for melodrama in the original. They were just showing you the scene. Whereas we recall, like we're surprised in Bride of Frankenstein that suddenly we're crying with the monster, you know, that they're going, oh, you gotta have emotion. You gotta make sure you've got moments of sweet, heart tugging every once in a while. And then they're going for it. So you're going, well, I'm not, just do the scene. Make a full character.
Well, and that's the curiosity is one of the things I love about the 1933 Kong. Like that Kong is just like, I've never seen anything like you before, Andero. I've never smelled anything like you. I don't understand these clothes. Like, I love how, and like, what's the thing where like when Jack Driscoll like stabs him when he's trying to reach into the cave and he stabs it and you see him like go, what the hell? That thing just bit me. What was that all about? Like there's all these moments of him just like discovery. And again, that's what makes him a real character is the fact that he's genuinely reacting to the things that are coming his way for the first time.
Right. When he kills the Tyrannosaurus, he picks up the head and has to do its jaw a little bit to make sure it's dead.
I always wonder how these T-Rex mouths work.
And it's funny because that scene, to me, again, getting back to Jackson, that's the different contract between Anne and Kong in the Jackson movie. When they face down those V-Rexes, Anne looks up at him and takes a little step back like, okay, you got this. And that's when he charges forward. And it's not quite the same relationship that it is in the original film.
And I think that's what I like about the 33, even more so than the 76 or the 2005, is that even though Anne recognizes that Kong has protected her over and over again, she's also like, I'm in the hands of a giant monster and I want to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't like she falls in love with Kong. She has, I mean, I think that's the thing about the 76 and 2005 is that we, the audience, has fallen in love with Kong. And therefore we want to see ourselves up on screen having that relationship. And it's kind of like, I love the fact that they trusted the audience in 33 to be like, you know what? They'll still feel for him because we'll show his quote humanity, but we don't need to have an avatar going, I love you, Kong.
Yeah. The one thing in 2005, I think that was so surprising to me and really impressive was the inhabitants of Skull Island. You believe this was an ancient, lost, depraved, trapped, cursed society, left to inbreed with water and the ramifications of having no one else, no other option to go to, no other people to get to. And you really, I mean, they created a community you've not quite seen like since Omega Man, something like that. Okay, everybody here has been touched by this.
I love the Skull Island of that movie. It's so like you said, like you feel like so much subtext of what has happened, like what living there has done to these people. You could see like Peter Jackson like imagining what happened, like the backstory of the first one is now like up front for this one.
What was interesting about the Peter Jackson one was that it was the first time that we didn't see them interrupt a ceremony where they were planning to sacrifice, like, yes, we're going to grab Anne, but like, there isn't like, we see that there's a ceremony in the process and that gets interrupted.
In terms of the Skull Islanders, I got to say, the ones that I like the best are the guys in Kong Skull Island because they've got sort of a utopian worshiping Kong group going on. The other thing about that is I just think, there's a little throwaway bit in the Jackson Jackson movie where somebody's reading from Heart of Darkness, and I love the craziness of. Well, we'll make a Kong movie that's basically Apocalypse Now. So they basically took the Heart of Darkness bit and ran with it. So I have to say that's high on my list of ones I like, but I do like Kong Skull Island a lot.
It was great that we just jump right in, like we go, here's this giant ape, like in the first like 2 minutes, you're like, okay, we don't need to like build up the suspense. And I do like the fact that he's monstrous but he also doesn't have a relationship with any of the humans, really. Like he has a vague acknowledgement thereof, but it isn't like he falls in love with a human female and we go through all that again. I love the fact that it kind of is its own beast, so to speak. Let's just circle back around to our 33 and any final thoughts or reminiscences, favorite moments even from the first one.
I would like to talk about my favorite moment.
Yeah,
is when King Kong destroys the train, because that was like the first little part I saw in Monster Mania, and then experiencing the ride, and then seeing how it was like the full thing in the movie. It was so incredible, like the model work, how it, like in the when you see inside the train, it feels so like it really is scary in there. It's such a it's like such a cool part.
No, I agree, and you get to see like the little people falling out. And the
conductor's reaction.
Oh yeah, when he sees the Kong.
I love that part.
Yeah. One thing I enjoy seeing are the biplanes because airplanes were still fairly new thing for the United States, and there were a lot of plane movies around that time. 1927, Wings, of course, was a big deal, and this was only 6 years after that. So we get a lot of that at the end, and of course, that's where we see the two directors as those two.
Yeah, right.
Ironically, the same year at RKO, they did Flying Down to Rio, where we got the female dancers on the wings of the biplanes.
And that was the same. That was the Cooper and Schoedsack as well, right? I'm pretty sure Cooper was involved in. I don't know about Schoedsack.
The thing I will always remember about the 33 version, the first time I saw it in a movie theater here in Chicago at the Copernicus Center, which was the Gateway Theater, and they played the restored version with the footage, Skull Island. Just the scenes that I thought, my God, I mean, what the content of it is, with Kong smashing and squishing and munching on these natives. And that scene, and it must have, for whatever reason, they thought it was just too much and they had to pull it out. But you look at it and you go, I mean, not since Robert Shaw sliding into the mouth of the shark. I mean, are you going, my God, you're watching a human being be consumed, munching alive. I thought, my God, they were really, they had thoughts back then. Their imaginations were running wild as to how wild they wanted to be.
That's that's what's so great about the character. He has all like the emotion and all the pathos, but he's also like really cool as a monster too. Like the way he like eats people and everything. Like it plays on both levels.
When I was young, the Fay Wray footage wasn't in it either. Besides the guys getting munched in New York and on Skull Island, and that makes it better too. I mean, that moment where he's sort of pulling out a dress and sniffing his fingers, and and then the whole pterodactyl sequence, Jack in the cave and everything like that. That cave sequence with all the layers and stuff. It's awesome.
What's funny is I literally never thought about it. I just kind of bought the idea like he was pulling the clothing off, not realizing that that's actually pulling, the costume off of Fay Wray with wires.
Right.
That's happening. And I was like, I had just completely bought into that. I'm like, oh yeah, clearly Kong is grabbing that and pulling it away. It's like, no, it's just one more special effect that is so well done that I don't even think about it being a special effect.
It is. I love that part. I was just thinking, I never saw the unrestored versions. I've only seen it with like all the scenes in it, but I always love that part. And it reminded me, the way he does it, it always reminded me of like peeling a banana.
Yeah. He's just like, what's under there? What's under
right?
there?
Yeah.
Well, one of my other favorite parts is when he's putting Anne up in the tree to fight the T-Rex. And you see the little animated Fay Wray in his hand, and then he puts it up there, and then it's like, boop, like it just pops out the real Fay Wray at the top of the tree. And it's a projected, that's the other thing, it's projected up there. Like, it's not like she's actually sitting in a tree anywhere.
There's so many great moments where they pass off things, or they play with the layers. I'm always surprised in the Stegosaurus sequence. There's more layers than I think at first. You know, I'm always expecting a foreground and a background, but then there's a midground and stuff that happens in between, and it keeps making me feel like here, you know.
And it really makes it feel like real, like the way like they do. That's the thing. It's like these special effects. They're like decades ahead of their time. Like they do it. Each one of them they do so well, and it's so layered. It feels so real. Like it's incredible how they were able to do all of that.
Well, thank you all so much. What a great conversation about a couple of really fantastic movies. Thank you so much for celebrating King Kong and his 90th birthday, and Son of Kong as well, which is odd that they're, you know, the same age, but you know, what are you going to do? They do things different on Skull Island.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you so much.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.